February 1957. Cookeville, Tennessee, a farmhouse on the western slope of the Cumberland Plateau, 11 miles south of town on the White County Road, where the hardwood timber runs down the hillside to a creek bottom that floods in spring and dries in August and smells like iron and wet leaves for the 6 months in between. The deed is being signed inside the Putnam County Savings Bank at 10 in the morning. Here is the story. Vera Sutton had lived in that house for 23 years, which is to say she had lived in it as a wife for 19 of them and as a widow for 4, since the telegram came in November of 1952, 2 weeks before the armistice, when the fighting in Korea was still going and the ceasefire that would end it was still being argued over in a tent at Panmunjom. Clyde Sutton was with the 187th Airborne Infantry Regiment, the Rakkasans, in the hills north of Chorwan in the Iron Triangle. He had volunteered in 1950 because he said a man who had sat out the Second War on a farm deferment owed something he had not yet paid. He was 31 years old when he shipped out. He was 32 when the telegram arrived. Vera was 27. Their sons, Danny and Earl, were 9 and 6. The Sutton farm was 180 acres of hill ground and creek bottom in the upper Cumberland, good for tobacco and cattle and not much else, which was enough, and had always been enough when Clyde was alive. They had bought it in 1934 with money Clyde's father had left, and a note from Putnam County Savings for $4,200, and Clyde had paid that note down to $1,800 by the time he shipped out in 1950. The house was white clapboard, 2 stories, with a porch that ran the full length of the front, and a kitchen that smelled of wood smoke and chicory coffee and the particular sweetness of cured tobacco that gets into the walls of a Tennessee farmhouse and never entirely leaves. The front porch boards were soft in the middle from 30 years of weather. The kitchen linoleum had a pattern of yellow flowers worn pale near the stove. The screen door off the back had a spring that sang when you opened it and slapped hard when it closed, a sound like a hand on a table. In winter, the house smelled of the wood Vera burned in the kitchen stove. Red oak, cut from the hillside timber, split by Danny once he was old enough to do it, and of the chicory coffee she made every morning at 5 and kept hot until noon. Some of you grew up in houses that smelled like that. Some of you know what chicory coffee tastes like on a February morning when the wood stove is the only warm thing in the room. Vera had managed the farm for 4 years without Clyde. She had grown the tobacco, cured it in the barn the way Clyde had taught her the first fall they were married, sold it through the Cookeville warehouse the way Clyde had always sold it, at prices that were fair in good years and not fair in poor ones. She had run 18 head of cattle with the help of her older son, Danny, who was 13 in 1952, and had been doing a man's share of the work since the telegram arrived. She had not bought new clothes in 3 years. She had not replaced the truck when the engine started burning oil in 1954. She had Danny pull the engine and rebuild it piece by piece in the barn over that winter, and it ran for 6 more years. She had made the mortgage payments. The $1,800 had grown back to $3,400 with arrears and penalties after Clyde died, and the 1953 crop came in thin. Every month, on time, from the tobacco money, and from the small allotment the Army sent, and from the particular stubbornness of a woman who has decided that the thing she has is the thing she will keep. The 1956 crop changed the arithmetic. A wet July rotted 30% of the tobacco in the field before it could be cut. The cattle prices dropped in October. By November, Vera was 2 payments behind. By January, she was 4 payments behind, and the letter from the bank had come, signed by the bank's president, a man named Doyle Marsh, who had been president of Putnam County Savings for 11 years, and who wrote letters with the particular courteous firmness of a man who has decided in advance that courtesy will serve as a substitute for mercy. Marsh had written that the bank had no option but to initiate foreclosure proceedings, and that the property would be conveyed to the bank on February 14, 1957, unless the outstanding balance of $3,900 was paid in full before that date. February 14th was a Thursday. Vera Sutton had not been able to find $3,900 in the weeks between January and Thursday. She drove into Cookeville that morning with Danny, who was 23 now, and who sat in the passenger seat of the farm truck with his jaw set and his hands on his knees and nothing to say. Because there was nothing to say. The roads from White County into Cookeville run through timber and hill farms and small crossroads communities with names that go back before the Civil War: Hanging Limb, Crawford, Double Springs. And on a February morning they were gray and empty, the hardwood trees stripped bare on both sides of the road, the creek visible through them in the low places, running dark and fast with the winter cold. There had been a light snow the night before that left a half-inch on the fields and was already going gray at the road edges. Danny had not slept. Vera had slept 4 hours. The Putnam County Savings Bank was on the square in Cookeville, a brick building with a plate glass window and the bank's name in gold letters above the door. Doyle Marsh met them in the lobby with his assistant and 2 copies of the conveyance documents and a pen already uncapped. He was professional. He was prompt. He expressed, in a tone that managed to be both sympathetic and conclusive, that the bank had no desire to see a family lose their home, and that it was a very unfortunate situation, and that Vera should know the bank would give her 60 days before requiring her to vacate. He said all of this standing in the bank lobby at 10 in the morning, while his assistant held the papers and people moved around them on their way to the teller windows, doing their Thursday business. Vera Sutton signed the documents. She did not look at Danny while she did it. Danny did not look at her. The lobby continued its Thursday morning around them. Footsteps on tile, the teller window sliding open and shut, a phone ringing behind the partition, and someone answering it in a low voice. Nobody stopped. Nobody looked. The kind of thing that was happening had happened before in that lobby, and would happen again, and the way a lobby handles it is to keep moving. You know what it is to be in a room where something is happening that everyone can see and everyone has decided is not their business. Where are you watching from? Drop your state in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. The man who had been standing near the front window of the bank for the past 7 minutes had come in to cash a check. He was in Cookeville because the production company had business at the county courthouse 2 blocks away. And he had come into the bank because a production company cashier had given him a check the week before that he had not yet gotten around to cashing. He was standing at the window reading the check when the Suttons came in. He saw Marsh meet them. He watched the assistant with the papers. He watched Vera Sutton's face when she read the conveyance document, not her expression, specifically. But the way her face went, still the way a person's face goes, still when they have arrived at a thing they cannot change, and have decided to stop fighting it. He put the check in his coat pocket. He crossed the lobby. Doyle Marsh was gathering the signed documents when the man came up beside the Suttons. Marsh looked up. His assistant looked up. Danny Sutton turned and looked, and then stood very still in the way that young men sometimes stand very still when something has arrived that they do not have words for. John Wayne looked at Doyle Marsh. He did not lower his voice. He did not raise it. What does she owe? Marsh held the documents. He looked at Wayne the way a man looks at a situation that is departing from the procedure he had prepared for. The conveyance has already been. What does she owe? Marsh said. The outstanding balance was $3,900. Wayne looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at the documents in Marsh's hands. He took out his checkbook. He wrote standing at the bank's own counter, in the lobby, the pen moving in the particular unhurried way of a man who has made a decision and is now simply executing it. He tore the check free and held it out to Marsh. Marsh took it. He looked at it. He looked at the documents. Wayne held out his hand for the conveyance papers. Marsh hesitated for the length of time it takes a man to understand that the situation has changed and that his hesitation is costing him something. He handed them over. Wayne held them for a moment. Then he folded them once and put them inside his coat. He looked at Marsh. "You'll void the conveyance and send her a release by Monday." He did not wait for an answer. He touched the brim of his hat to Vera Sutton. Not a word, just that, and walked to the door and out into the February cold of the Cookeville Square. And in a few seconds, the plate glass window showed him going across the square toward the courthouse, and then he was gone. The lobby continued. The teller window opened and closed. The phone rang again behind the partition. Danny Sutton had not moved. Vera was looking at the space where the conveyance documents had been. Doyle Marsh voided the conveyance that afternoon. The release reached Vera's attorney on Monday morning, as instructed. Vera Sutton did not lose the house. She farmed the White County ground for 9 more years after that February morning, until 1966, when Danny took over the daily operation, and Vera stayed in the house and kept the kitchen stove going and the chicory coffee on and watched the hillside timber the way she had watched it for 30 years. Danny Sutton farmed the 180 acres until 1988. He grew tobacco until the buyout programs of the 1990s made it unworkable, then switched to cattle, and then his daughter, Louise, named for Vera's mother, born in 1961, took over the operation in 1995 and runs it still. Earl Sutton, the younger boy who was 6 years old when his father's telegram arrived, went to Cookeville High School and then to Tennessee Tech on a partial academic scholarship and became an engineer. He spent 30 years with the Tennessee Valley Authority in Knoxville. He came back to the farm every Thanksgiving and every summer until Vera died in 1989. And after that, he came back to see Danny and to sit on the same front porch where they had both grown up. He brought his own children. The farm they came back to existed because of one morning in February of 1957 that neither of them knew the full story of until Danny told it in 1994, when Earl's oldest son asked why the mortgage release and the telegram were in the same frame. Set out what $12,000 bought that morning. The check Wayne wrote was for $12,000. $3,900 cleared the note. The remaining $8,100 went into an account Vera opened at a different bank in Cookeville the following week, not Putnam County Savings, and that account paid the farm's operating expenses for the next 4 years without another missed payment. $12,000. 9 more years of Vera Sutton on the land her husband bought in 1934. Danny farming it for 22 years after her. Louise running it from 1995 to today. 30 years of a third generation on the same hill ground and creek bottom. Earl Sutton bringing his children back to a front porch that still existed. For 30 years of Thanksgivings. Because the deed never left the family name. A farm that should have transferred to a bank's balance sheet before noon on a Thursday in February of 1957 instead produced 4 more decades of tobacco, and then cattle, and then a granddaughter who came back from Tennessee Tech with an agribusiness degree and never left the county. That is what $12,000 becomes when it arrives in a bank lobby at the right moment. Not $12,000. 68 years of a family name on a deed. 3 generations who knew the sound of that screen door and the smell of that kitchen and the way the creek bottom floods in spring. One son who grew up without his father and became the man the farm needed. One son who carried the farm home in his memory every Thanksgiving for 30 years. One granddaughter who chose to stay. The house is still there. Danny added a bathroom in 1971 and replaced the porch boards in 1983. But the clapboard is the original, the kitchen is the original, and the wood stove that Vera burned red oak in every February morning is still in the corner. Louise uses it. In the kitchen. On the wall beside the back door, the one with the screen door that sings and slaps, there is a frame. Inside it is the mortgage release from Putnam County Savings Bank, dated February 18, 1957, signed by Doyle Marsh, certifying the note paid in full and the title clear. Below it, in the same frame, is the telegram from November 1952. Vera had kept it in the kitchen drawer for 30 years, folded small, and when she died in 1989, Danny found it there and had it framed beside the release because the two documents belonged together. The thing that started the trouble, and the paper that ended it. The morning light comes through the kitchen window in February and lies across the frame for an hour before it moves. The screen door still sings when you open it. The hillside timber is still standing on the slope behind the house, and in spring the creek still floods the bottom pasture the way it always has. The way it did when Clyde Sutton first walked that ground in 1934 and decided it was worth a note at the bank. If you drive south out of Cookeville on the White County Road, 11 miles down the road bends left around a limestone outcrop, and then you will see a white clapboard farmhouse on the slope to the west, with a long front porch and a line of red oak on the hill behind it. The frame is on the kitchen wall. The wood stove is in the corner. The creek is running in the bottom. If you have ever known a woman who held a farm together after the telegram came and the money stopped, and the bank started sending letters, who kept the payments going as long as they could be kept and showed up every morning and asked nothing from anyone, this story belongs to her. John Wayne never told anyone. Not in an interview, not to a colleague, not in any letter or journal that has ever been found. He was in Cookeville for courthouse business. He cashed his check. The cashier's window at Putnam County Savings shows a transaction in his name that Thursday morning, and he left. The production company's records note only that he was in Putnam County on February 14th for location research. They do not note what else happened in the bank lobby before he got to the teller window. There are men who understand, without needing to say it, that a widow who farmed alone for 4 years and made every payment she could make, and drove into town on a February morning to sign away a house she had lived in for 23 years, had already earned whatever it cost to give it back. Not charity, arithmetic. The debt was to her and to the man who was not there, and to the 2 boys who grew up without him on ground that was going to disappear if somebody did not stop the arithmetic from running the way it was running. He understood that. He settled the account. He walked out into the cold. If this story stayed with you, subscribe. There are more like it. And unfortunately, they don't make men like John Wayne anymore.